A tipping point for world powers. America's influence in Latin America is slipping to the Chinese regime. But why is having access to the Southern Hemisphere so important? In this special report, we look at how the Chinese regime has quietly taken over control in many countries, how trade has won Beijing leverage in political, diplomatic, and military spheres across the region, and how Americans' daily lives could be turned inside out. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. One of the biggest players in the Southern Hemisphere could be quietly taken over by the Chinese Communist Party if steps aren't taken.
There's an existential threat to the world from the Chinese Communist Party.
That's Captain Jim Fanell, former Director of Intelligence and Information Operations for the U.S. Pacific Fleet. So how has the Chinese regime gained that kind of edge?
Over the last 25 years, China has been, as we all been watching, growing phenomenally as an economic and military power.
Beijing has done that through its infrastructure outreach policy known as the Belt and Road Initiative. Through that, China has expanded its influence across the South China Sea and the Indian Ocean, even reaching into the Mediterranean. And through those sea lanes, China has found its way into Europe. But Beijing has also expanded its influence on land, instead of sea lanes, along railroad tracks. Those rail lines stretch across Central Asia and into Eastern, Central, and Western Europe. Those advances have made some headlines. But there's another area that hasn't, that should maybe get more attention than it has so far. And that's China's growing influence in Latin America.
And over the course of the last 18 years, trade between China and Latin America has gone up and up and up dramatically. And in 2021, there was $450 billion worth of trade, almost $500 billion worth of trade between China and Latin America. And so from an economic standpoint, China has really enlarged its position there.
Now, China is Brazil's main trade partner. Of that $450 billion worth of trade, $135 billion was with Brazil alone, hitting a new trade record. But with all that trade, there are concerns. Brazilian journalist Paulo Figueiredo gives one example, the current Brazilian Congress.
First thing that they did was that the Chinese government paid a trip for the whole party of the president of Brazil right now to go to China. And the president of Brazil, President Bolsonaro, is very anti-China. But they instead of paying the president to go to China, they paid his party, all the Congress members, senators, and to go to China.
As to what kind of effect that had?
During the first or second year of President Bolsonaro's term, they all turned against the president to the point that the president had to leave the party. The president left the party that he got elected, and now he's in a different party. He's running for office for re-election again, but he's in a different party, and that's like mind-blowing.
But those concerns aren't just local.
And in fact, last year, the former commander of the U.S. Southern Command, Admiral Craig Fowler, talked about the United States losing its positional advantage in the hemisphere, the Western Hemisphere. And so China has been kind of quietly under the radar, been moving in and making economic inroads.
Those inroads grant China access to natural resources like Brazilian coal, lithium, and other elements that will help grow China's economy. Recently, the head of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's International Affairs Division, Myron Brilliant, said the U.S. must do more to strengthen ties with Brazil. He said what we have seen in the last decade is a significant rise of Chinese investment and engagement in the region. Adding, we are also seeing Russian engagement. We would say that the U.S. has to be present.
The United States used to be the #1 country in terms of trade with Brazil. But during the administration of the Workers' Party, which is our sort of a Communist Party in Brazil, and Brazil started to tie the relationship with China. Now China is the #1 trading partner that Brazil has right now. And because of that, they have a tremendous power in every sector.
So why is Brazil so important? The country is often considered Latin America's powerhouse.
Well, Brazil is the #1 country of Latin America, okay? Everyone follows Brazil lead in Latin America in a certain sense. Brazil was always a very close partner to the United States. And right now, China is becoming so influential. And with that, they can use Brazil, for example, in the international multilateral agencies like the United Nations, for example. They can use Brazil's vote in their favor, for example, to support their interests. And they do that very often.
But that's not all. Brazil also has natural resources that are crucial in several sectors. One example is iron ore. Brazil's mining giant Vale recently agreed to a deal with a Chinese port to expand China's iron ore handling capacity.
Vale, we call it Vale. In Brazil, they're a huge company. They used to be a government-owned company. They went sort of private in the late 90s, early 2000s. But the government still has a big influence in the company through pension funds, through government pension funds and all that.
And what makes that deal so significant?
Cargo ships that can carry 400,000 deadweight tons of iron ore, which is the largest. They call them the Vale Max or kind of China Max ships. So that agreement now with this Brazilian iron ore company with China allows China to deepen their ports in China so that they can get more coal.
But with those ports, Fanell warns China can press to get something in return.
The Chinese may say, well, we've done this great project here in China to deepen our ports to allow these big vessels to come in. What will you do for us to allow us to maybe have some kind of an arrangement where we can come in with our ships? Similar to what we're kind of seeing in the Solomon Islands right now, where there's this security pact that's come in, and an element of the security pact says that Chinese warships can pull into port into Solomons if they need to.
Aside from the diplomatic, there's also a military aspect to it.
China has sent and uses their military in the region. I recall when I was on active duty, I think in 2014 or 2015, there was 1 or 2 years there where Chinese naval warships made more port calls in South America than the United States Navy. And so this is, a trend line that we should be watching.
Part of that movement, Fanell notes, is through fishing vessels that China sends into the waters in the area.
But there's also been reports of, conflicts between Argentinian fishermen and Chinese fishermen and Brazilian, where they've been in conflict, open conflict at sea, as Chinese fishing fleets are poaching, stealing resources from these nations in South America from their fishing fleets.
But with those conflicts, Fanell warns we could see escalation.
And what that means is, in order to protect those fishing fleets, you'll probably see, like what you've seen in the South China Sea and what we're starting to see in the South Pacific, is the Chinese, maritime militia, Chinese Coast Guard. They're being built up, and they're not going to stay just in the local waters of the first island chain, but they're going to probably go out and help support and defend any of their interests with the fishing fleets that could go off to into the Atlantic, the South Atlantic, or onto the Pacific side of South America. And so we saw that, I think, in the Galapagos, that there were some vessels that could be termed maritime militia.
On top of all that, there's still another way the Chinese regime is using to poke around the area.
China has been sending oceanographic research ships to the South Atlantic for the last 10 years. And those kind of ships are doing essentially surveys and mapping of the bottom of the ocean to understand what the sea looks like underneath the sea, and so that you can have a roadmap, if you will. And that's usually a precursor for submarine operations.
But with so much development and so many different areas, what's the Chinese regime's overarching goal?
there's this idea that they want to become the global hegemon, and Latin America is definitely a part of that. And I don't think we pay enough attention to it.
Just in case you missed that, Fanell says Beijing is looking for hegemony, meaning dominance or authority over others, especially in politics. And how has China gained that leverage over Brazil and Latin America writ large?
Think about it. They control the commodities, the minerals, the food, the land, the energy of Brazil, and communications. And more than that, they own the politicians, several of them. They own, and of course, they have this huge influence in Brazilian media. Brazilian media, it's completely took over by them.
With that kind of leverage, what can China do?
There's also a diplomatic side to this. Obviously, China has been trying to isolate Taiwan and diplomatically. And so what we've seen is a number of nations, especially in the last 8 years under Xi, diplomatically work with their wolf warrior diplomats to essentially get different nations in South America to change their recognition from recognizing Taiwan to recognizing Beijing.
A recent report by the Council of Foreign Relations notes that out of countries in Latin America, 25 have officially recognized Beijing instead of Taiwan. On top of that, Figueiredo adds there's another side.
If a war starts right now, Brazil wouldn't automatically side with the United States, as it would until the 2000s. Right now, a lot of people in Brazil, a lot of people would say, well, who's our number one trade partner? Who invests more in our country? Who bribes more politicians? Who owns the media, but which has a big influence in the public opinion? So Brazil right now wouldn't necessarily side with the United States, although we're very close to the United States and we're not close to China culturally. But keep in mind, they're exporting their worldview to the rest of the world. You're seeing more and more restrictions to civil liberties, more China-like than U.S.-like.
The recent report from the Council on Foreign Relations listed all the countries that have joined the Belt and Road.
21 countries are now part of the Belt and Road. Only 12 are not. And so I think what you see is a growing, I like to talk about strategic trend lines. And so there's a strategic trend line where China is growing in its influence in Latin America. And there becomes a point when it's a tipping point when they become the dominant economic power. They're not quite there yet.
But before we get to that tipping point, the U.S. is taking steps to prevent it from getting that far.
The Competes Act and other things that will help the United States be able to remain economically involved with Latin and South America. But China is coming in and trying to supplant the United States.
What does that mean for the U.S. and the world? Figueiredo touches on the importance of Brazil.
We're always one of the top 10 economies in the world. We have a huge population in terms of Brazil is one of the number one or number two producers of food in the world, and a lot of minerals, a lot of commodities. Brazil supplies a lot of commodities. It's a country that has an immense amount of energy, oil, and all that. And these are strategic resources. When we talk about war, and yeah, geopolitics is thinking about the possibility of a full-scale war, Brazil is the most important thing that we have in the Southern Hemisphere.
As for what that means for Washington.
If we're not there, and the Chinese Navy is there, the PLA Navy is there, operating and conducting exercises, we lose the ability to influence those countries because they see that China is willing to send ships and we're not. And that sends a psychological signal of the United States' commitment to the region, and that would affect other areas in the economy or diplomatic arena.
But with all of those moves happening on such a massive international scale, why should Americans care?
Of China's growing their power, across all these, it's like tentacles of an octopus. It's enveloping the world right now. And so when Americans say it doesn't matter to me because it's far away, well, it's far away today, but it won't be far away in the future.
And experts say if we don't band together,
China is going to take resources from South America and they're going to exploit that to their benefit. It's going to make South America poor in the long run. And it's going to manipulate their own natural resources and put them in potentially into this debt trap kind of mindset that we've seen play out in other areas where the Belt and Road has gone. So I think it's a long-term issue in some sense, but it's a near-term issue right now in what's happening, and we have to take action.
But where do we start? What are the first steps where we could take action?
So we have to pay attention to what's going on in the region and be a good partner there.
To do that, Fanell suggests incentivizing American companies to do business in South America and Latin America.
We also need to work with these countries to find out what it is that they actually want from China that they could get from the United States. So what's been offshored from China? What products does China provide to Latin America that America could provide instead?
But there's more.
I think the United States needs to increase the amount of investment in Brazil. It's not and just treat Brazil differently. It's not only a matter of economics, but also a matter of international policy. It's in a certain sense, it's a matter of war strategy.
If that doesn't happen, the consequences will be felt in every sector. Figueiredo also points out something else: the importance of Brazil's upcoming election.
Brazilian elections this year is very important for the world.
As Fanell cautions,
the regular Americans at home need to understand that they need to be supportive of the principles that founded our nation, and we can't be passive and allow China just to go in and, I talk sometimes about the game of Go or Weiqi, and China's putting their stones around the world, and they're putting them into positions in key areas so that when the time is right, a lot of other stones will turn to their color, to their side. And we're not playing right now. We're kind of playing checkers while they're playing Weiqi.
Weiqi is an abstract strategy board game for two players. The aim is to surround more territory than your opponent. It's believed to be the oldest invented board game, hailing back to ancient China 2,500 years ago. As experts warn, if steps aren't taken to protect our allies around the world, sooner rather than later, those oversights will come back to haunt us. Whether that's in our ability to get everyday items and medicines, or our military strength and strategies used to keep us safe. That's all for today's China in Focus on YouTube. We're now sharing a shortened version of our program on YouTube. That's after being demonetized for a year. Full episodes can be watched on our partner platform, AppWalk TV. To sign up for a 14-day free trial, please click the link down below. Thanks for watching China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer, and see you tomorrow.
Every once in a while, something comes along so masterful, it leaves you in awe. So inspiring, it changes your life. So beautiful, you wish it would never end. When that happens, it's something not to be missed. Shen Yun, an all-new production every year.
The performance was enchanting.
I feel better about the world. I feel uplifted.
It touches you. It really does.
The expertise of the dancers was really, really strong.
To know that it was live music was really fantastic.
We didn't want to miss this.
Make sure you see it.
Have to come. Life-changing.